We will be up to chapter 28 today. We're making our way through the troubleshooting efforts that the person is coming to the Alter Rebbe saying, I'm trying, and I'm still stuck. I'm still feeling thoughts that are getting me anxious, getting me depressed, getting me sad. In chapter 26, we spoke more about if there's things coming from livelihood concerns, worries of family, and health issues. Then we spoke about past misdeeds, sins that a person has committed that brings the person down, and they feel depressed over something that they've done. What to do with that? The next part in chapter 27, we're talking about more the shame, meaning not something specific that we have done, but it's more the fantasies and inappropriate thoughts that are going through our mind that is making us feel shameful and feeling disgusting over who we are. And in chapter 27, we discussed that at length. Now, chapter 28, we're going to speak about more of a specific type of struggle or shame that a person is feeling. The chapter 28 is going to speak about when you're in a state of spiritual ecstasy, you're in a state of prayer where you're feeling it, you're connecting with God, you're feeling on a spiritual high, so to speak. And during that time, inappropriate thoughts are flooding your mind. And that makes you down to an even higher degree than before, because here you are trying to feel connected, trying to feel divine energy through you, trying to feel God. And during that time, your mind is being flooded with disgusting thoughts, with inappropriate, lustful desires. So that makes you feel even more disgusted. Because if I'm capable of having these thoughts now, my whole prayer is worthless. The hypocrisy is to a whole new level. That's what you feel. You feel, I'm so two-faced. Here I am trying to connect, and look what's happening to me for real. So the example the Alter Rebbe is going to give, and the example I think I may have mentioned at the end of last week's class. It's been a while since last week. A lot has happened since then. But if I'm not mistaken, the example I gave is in hockey, which is a sport here played in America, but in Canada, when you play hockey, it comes with fights also. The Canadian way of playing hockey is a couple of body checks and extra few punches and elbows going to the ribs. So in hockey, every now and then, it's pretty rare, but there is every now and then a fight, a brawl that breaks out. You see this in baseball, and you'll see this in other sports as well. But what happens is interesting is first they're fighting and they have energy for maybe like 15, 20 seconds. But after a while, they both get tired. So they're both like almost like resting on each other. And then one has the extra energy to do a couple more, what are they called? Uppercuts. So the other person gets the energy also. He has a renewed adrenaline rush to keep up the fight. Or if in wrestling or more boxing, if someone KOs the other person, it's funny, most of the classes, ladies, I don't know how much you would appreciate these wrestling and boxing examples. Like, tell me if it resonates or not. But what happens I know my grandfather was into boxing, and what happens is if someone gets punched out, the referee stands there and he has to count, I think, to 3 or to 5. I don't remember. He has to count. And if the other, or 10, I think. And if the other person doesn't make it up, the other person wins. So you'll see he's like blanked out. But then when the referee's counting, he jumps right back up. Like he musters the strength to go up. So the example, that's not the example that Alter Rebbe is going to give here about hockey or wrestling. But I'm using that example to remind us that what the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul, what the evil inclination, the klipa, what it's trying to do is you are in a mode of spiritual high. It's feeling knocked out. So what it does is it gives a final push to try to get itself up, to try to match the energy of the holy side, of the godly side. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you're feeling these thoughts during prayer, don't get down about yourself. Just drop them, ignore them, push it away. Realize that the reason why these thoughts are coming in is because your prayers are actually very powerful, are very impactful, and therefore it's feeling knocked out, and it's putting a push in to try to elevate itself, to try to, with an adrenaline rush, to try to fight back. but realize that it's actually coming because of the power of your prayers. So don't feel your prayer is worthless. You're feeling two-faced. On the contrary, realize the power of your prayers. So plan A, I'm just reading my notes over here. So first of all, the Alter Rebbe is going to say, don't feel bad over these thoughts, meaning don't pursue them. That's forbidden. We're not allowed to. You're a Beinani here. We're working on keeping it strong. But if you're feeling these thoughts during prayer, that as soon as you open your siddur, the worries of your bills and the worries of your family are coming and flooding yourself. And of course, you could take that on your own level, what it is that is arising in your heart. And when you're trying to be on a spiritual stature, plan A is ignore it. It's just static and it has to be ignored. So let's start with that. And I have more notes, but they're going to come up in a little bit. So I think we should just delve inside instead of you guys hearing my 2 cents on it. Okay, so we are on 318 in the Tanya book, chapter 28. I'm going to pull up the Kindle. You may hear some sound as it comes. And I see some questions popping up, so I will tend to them. What is the Hebrew phrase to push it away? Iskafia means to subdue it.
You will be held little by little to rid the citra group.
There we go. What is the Hebrew phrase? So iskafia means to subdue, but what about the verb or action of push away? So good question, Shira. So the answer is iskafia is exactly to subdue, to bend. And to push away in Hebrew is the word is doche. Doche means to push, right, Eliza? Sounds good. So litchot, the shtei yadayim, is the wording the Alter Rebbe actually uses in the Hebrew, is to push it away with 2 hands. There will be another word that we addressed a little bit in chapter 27, but it's going to be more of a focus now in chapter 28, which is the word in Hebrew for transformation. In Hebrew, the word is, you may have heard it on Purim. On Purim, we have heard the word of nahapoch. The nahapoch hu. It's actually used in songs that we sing on Purim. Hepech means the opposite. And the reason why we use that on Purim, which is coming up in 3.5 weeks, my goodness, it's really coming up the end of February. I think February 26th is Purim already. And anyways, what's going on in my mind is Purim last year was in the middle of March. And March 8th, I think. And that's when there was the whole worry of the lockdown. And a few days later is when California went on lockdown. So my goodness, it means it's almost a year that we've been in this COVID here in the United States. So the word is, nahapoch means to change over, a total turnover. And that's what happened on Purim, where Haman tried to destroy the Jews. Really, him and his family are the ones that got pushed down and destroyed as a result. And Mordechai got promoted, elevated to prime minister. So the whole story got turned over. That's going to be important for us. The Kabbalistic word is ishapcha, which means to turn over. And a full transformation of what you do with that evil side, not just to push it away. There is a method of transforming it. It's not for where we are up to. Chapter 28, the Alter Rebbe says, don't be a fool to try to think you could turn over those inappropriate thoughts. But we'll get there a little later in the class, which is going to be a pretty good part. Any other questions before we begin? Okay. So let's get in it. Everyone sees the screen? I'm hoping. Okay, awesome. So this is when your mind wanders. Section 1, inappropriate thoughts during prayer. So here's a wandering mind, the thoughts that are going to other things that are inappropriate. And now specifically in chapter 28, that's coming up during prayer. So we have a great method of how to deal with it. And let's see it inside. Yaakov, you can see the screen? It's big enough on your phone? Good? Okay, cool. Chapter 28 is the last of 3 chapters that offer us tools to avoid sadness in a variety of settings. After discussing sadness caused by inappropriate actions, which was in chapter 26, chapter 27 taught us how to deal with inappropriate thoughts and desires. Meaning not something you did, but something you're thinking about and feelings that you're having. so as not to allow them to dampen our spirits. But so far, we have learned only how to deal with inappropriate thoughts that occur in a general setting, such as business or leisure, when you're sitting on your couch. It is more disturbing, however, when these thoughts plague us when we're trying to pray or study Torah. What do we do then? These inappropriate thoughts are coming up when you're in a spiritual standing, and then it makes you even feel more disgusting than ever. So let's see that. And even if while worshiping God in Torah study or devotional prayer, you begin to fantasize about physical indulgences or have other inappropriate thoughts. So the method, the Alter Rebbe says, to deal with it, don't turn your heart to them. Rather, divert your attention away from them immediately. The simple and practical way to deal with inappropriate thoughts is to ignore them completely. Done. Easier said than done, I would say, to just push it away, to ignore it, to divert your attention. But don't let it get yourself down. I think that's going to be the main point. But here, there is a method we're about to learn about, is the method of a tzaddik. A tzaddik, which is someone who has already conquered their evil side and vanquished their animal soul, they have an opportunity of transformation to elevate the inappropriate thoughts. We'll see it inside, but just an interesting part. When would a tzaddik ever have an inappropriate thought? Like what we're about to learn is that a tzaddik, he could delve into the inappropriate thought and actually transform it. So just practically, I'm just going to pause for a moment here, just to explain to you a little bit of what transformation is about. Love could be extremely special, holy, or it could be extremely dangerous. You could love the right things and the right people, and you could love the wrong things and the wrong people. So a tzaddik is one that he could take the love, get to the depth of the love, and actually at that point, just channel it in the right direction. Instead of it being something inappropriate, the depth of love is beautiful. It just needs to be in the right place. So the tzaddik is able to take that love and elevate it and enhance their love for Hashem or for Torah. The same is with, let's say, anger. Anger is wrong. Is actually, we're learning Tanya that is actually considered a mode of idol worship, because anger comes from ego. Do you know who I am? How dare you do that to me? Ego is saying that there's God, but then there's me, or there's something else that's more important. So anger is a method of idol worship, obviously in a very finer substance, finer level. But the root of anger comes from discipline, justice. In Hebrew, the word, the feeling or the attribute is called gevura, which literally means strength. And that's where anger can come from. So a tzaddik knows how to take that feeling and actually elevate it to be used in the right direction. That really anger comes from the place of fear or justice. And you relate that in the form of fear of God or respect and awe and reverence, which could be a very holy thing. So the tzaddik knows how to channel it, how to transform it, how to elevate it. But the question, I don't know if he's going to mention here, how would a tzaddik even have the inappropriate part of it? The part that is evil. He's a tzaddik. He doesn't have any of that. So it's interesting. Here's just a very cool balance, is that the tzaddik, he actually doesn't, it's not coming from his own feelings. A tzaddik relates to the people around him. There's a feeling in the room that he senses, because he's very sensitive, and he picks up on it. So therefore, the anger that may be in the room is something that mirrors in him. And for that, he's able to elevate it. He's able to sense it and lift it up. So it's not his own inappropriate thought, it's actually from those around him. And he's able to tap into it, which is, this whole concept is a very cool one. We'll see how much Alter Rebbe focuses on it. But the Alter Rebbe uses some harsh words. He says, don't be a fool and think that you could handle and involve yourself in trying to elevate it. That's foolish. That's tzaddik's job, not yours. Don't try to be all holy and say, I'm gonna do it. That's wrong. And just something else that's coming up. Many of you are familiar, maybe you even remember as children, on when you go to Yom Kippur to synagogue, you may be familiar with people tapping or banging their fist on their chest and saying what's known as the al-chet. And they penitence. They ask from God for forgiveness over misdeeds, over mistakes, sins, etc. But if you read the English, some of them are crazy. Some of them are like, whoo, I hope I don't know anyone that did this or that. And it lists like a bunch, right? It lists actually 44. It lists 2 for each one of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's 2 that have a sin starting with the letter Aleph, and then 2 that starts with sin starting with the letter Bet, and there's 22 letters, so it's 44 lines, right? But if you look at them, a lot of them are not performed by us, hopefully not, and for sure it's tzaddik. So why would a tzaddik have to say these when he knows for sure he didn't do it? So he's actually, the answer is he's not doing it for himself. He's saying it on behalf of Klal Yisrael. He's saying it on behalf of other people. All of us are brothers and sisters, and there are people that need the prayer for forgiveness, but they're not doing it themselves. So a tzaddik is one that he's praying on behalf of other people. So similar here, the tzaddik is so sensitive that he doesn't have that feeling or an appropriate thought himself. It's just that he's picking up on what's going on around him. But he can handle it. Let's see that inside. So just to summarize, Nancy, welcome, and Steve, welcome. Glad you're able to make it. The first 15 minutes, the recording will be up, God willing, this evening, so you can watch that if you want to catch up. But I could also just catch us up by saying that we're learning over here about inappropriate thoughts that a person is feeling, not like in chapter 27, which was during their business or during their leisure when they're sitting on the couch. Over here, it's actually talking about when we are during prayer. And we answered that if you're feeling these during prayer, don't be down on yourself. Don't feel that my prayer is ineffective because look what it's leading me to. I'm actually having lustful thoughts during prayer. Realize that it's actually as a result of the evil side, the klipa, trying to push back and trying to make its way back into the fight. And we'll see that more at length as we carry on. But so far, all we learned is drop it. Don't focus on it. Don't let it get you down. So now, let me just reshare the screen. Sorry for that little pause. And here we go. There we go. So the simple and practical way to deal with inappropriate thoughts is to ignore them completely. We're towards the top of the Kindle. And don't be a fool. In Hebrew, the word for a fool is a shota. I don't know if you ever, it's actually used in Yiddish. So I'm not sure if perhaps you had your grandfather when he was low on patience and you're making noise by the Seder and jumping on the table. And he's like, shota. It's like, Barbara, have you ever heard that expression? Maybe it's only used in Hebrew. I'm not sure. I thought it was maybe used in Yiddish, but perhaps not. Anyway, don't be a shaita means don't be a fool and try to elevate the emotional content of the inappropriate thought back to its source. As a practice known from the Baal Shem Tov. To explain this, he's going to go on to explain. The advice to divert your attention away from inappropriate thoughts immediately represents a retreat from early Hasidic teachings, which advise that such thoughts should be elevated. So this is a very interesting thing. We know the Alter Rebbe, who's the author of the Tanya, he considered himself to be a spiritual grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement. They actually lived, their lives overlapped for 15 years. The Alter Rebbe was born in 1745. The Baal Shem Tov died in 1760. And just to explain to you a little bit of history, I think it'll just give you a little more of an appreciation. The Baal Shem Tov had 60 close disciples. And when I say disciples, it doesn't mean just like a student that's 10 years old. It meant rabbis, giants of Torah that followed their teacher and his every word. They were known as the Chevraya Kadisha. We know here, Chevra Kadisha means the members of the Holy Assembly are the people that tend to burial, and Vivian is on that and very involved in that, which is a huge mitzvah. And parenthetically, God willing, we're trying to set one up here for our Novato community, and it's not going to be member based, which means anyone who wants to have that done for them or for a family member, we would be able to provide that service. It's going to be volunteer based. I know Vivian already signed up and several others. We just have to set it all up. But the Baal Shem Tov, his students, were also known as the Chevraya Kadisha, the colleagues, the members of the Holy Assembly. And after he passed, the Maggid, his student, took over, his primary student. His name was actually Rabbi David Friedman. And he actually had 120 students in his inner circle. And they were ranging in age. The oldest of them, he was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Some of you may have heard me share stories of him. The youngest was actually the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. But Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who was the oldest, he said that we all drank from the same bucket, meaning we all studied from the same teacher, but the Litvak, which was a reference to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the author of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, because he came from Lithuania. So he was known as the Litvak, which was the, I guess, Yiddish term for someone from Lithuania. He said that the Litvak, he took the cream. He got from the top of the bucket, meaning he took the best layer. He understood the teachings the highest. So the reason why I share this is the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, it was his teacher's teacher, right? The Baal Shem Tov student was the Maggid, and the Maggid student was the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe considered the Baal Shem Tov his grandfather spiritually in teaching. The Baal Shem Tov knew when the Alter Rebbe was born. He actually, on the 18th of Elul, which was also the Baal Shem Tov's birthday, in 1745, when he turned 47 years old, the Alter Rebbe was born that day. And even though there were hundreds, if not, thousands of kilometers away, the Baal Shem Tov sensed a new soul being born in the world. When I say a new soul, most souls that we have are, Maddie, I think we spoke about this, and it seems like a request for a class on this. We are recycled souls. We are, in Hebrew, the word is gilgulim. We are souls that come back. But that day, the 18th of Elul, 1745, was a new soul. The Baal Shem Tov sensed the new soul came to the world, which was a very rare occurrence. And he actually prayed. He said, I'm going to pray. I'll be the chazan. I'll lead the prayers. And he used melodies that's designated to be used only on the holidays. Even though it was a Wednesday, a regular weekday, he used the special melodies that is only used on the holiday because he sensed the special soul. Just one more interesting point. The Baal Shem Tov didn't allow the Alter Rebbe's parents to bring him to the Baal Shem Tov to get a blessing. The Baal Shem Tov, people would bring their children to get blessings from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov didn't allow it. Didn't want the Alter Rebbe to come to visit. They begged and begged, and he allowed them to bring him for his third haircut, but in a way that the boy wouldn't see the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov didn't want to meet the boy face to face. And the reason is he didn't want to ruin the fact that the Alter Rebbe, when he was going to get older, he was going to be a disciple, a follower of his student, of the Baal Shem Tov student of the Maggid. So he felt if he meets me, he's going to be more a chassid of mine, and I need him to be a chassid of my student. So in order to separate it, he had to distance himself, so to speak. Anyway, that's more parenthetical. The reason why I'm bringing that up here is just it's interesting. The practice of elevating inappropriate thoughts and getting to the feeling and elevating it and making it holy is something that was practiced by the Baal Shem Tov, and he taught how to do it to his disciples and followers. And here the Alter Rebbe is saying is don't be a fool to try to elevate it. So he's almost retreating from the practice that was taught in the generation prior, in the previous generation of the early Chassidim. So I just needed to give that background so that you appreciate what's going on over here. But let's see it inside. Okay. Any questions before we continue?
I have a short question, I
Sure.
hope,
Yeah.
which is when you're in the middle of your morning prayers and
Yeah.
you think about, well, I have to text,
Yeah.
for me, it's my daughter, or something that is distracting me from prayers. It's not inappropriate in the
Mhm.
way of,
Right.
but it's inappropriate in terms of, being in the middle of prayer. I was wondering if others experience that and how you recommend that we actually
The best
maybe just
ideas
what
come
maybe
for me. The best. I forget about the inappropriate. You're right, Nancy. The best ideas comes during prayer, because what you're trying to do during prayers, you're trying to clear your mind. So then your mind's getting full of good ideas because it has time to think now. So, and it's hard to keep that focus. So, by the way, just interesting. For a while, there was an older fellow. Actually, one of our Torahs that we have in our ark right behind us came from as a gift. It's an older Torah, but it came from a friend of mine who passed away. His name was Daniel Fairman of blessed memory, and we would study Torah every day together. He's from San Diego. My in-laws are from San Diego, so we got to know each other. We would connect a lot. He wanted me to stay in San Diego. When I told him I was moving up to Novato, he said, Menachem, stay in San Diego. I'll pay your salary. You're needed in the Jewish community in San Diego. And actually, I'm on record, so I have to be careful, but I was actually considering it for a while. For like a while, for a 24-year-old. When I mean a while, I mean for like 2 weeks, um, until I got I wrote to the Rebbe, and some of you may have heard of this practice. To get a response from the Rebbe is much harder because the Rebbe is not in 770. The Rebbe is buried in Queens, but a lot of times we write a letter, and to get a response, we put it into one of the volumes of the Rebbe's correspondence that the Rebbe had for 45 years, from 1950, 51, and see a response that he wrote to other people. And there's many thousands and thousands and thousands of letters that are published with the permission of the recipient, and many more tens of thousands that were not published. But from the ones that are published, we write to the Rebbe, and spiritually we'll try to see if there's a response that we could understand. And it was just interesting. The Rebbe responded, and back in 2011, when we were trying to make up our mind, the Rebbe said that the Rebbe was responding to a group in Melbourne, in a new community, that were trying to figure out who should be their rabbi. And the Rebbe was guiding them, and they were addressing to the Rebbe the minutes of their meeting. And the result of their meeting was that they were appointing a certain rabbi to run their community, and they wanted the Rebbe's blessings. And the Rebbe responded that you should know it's a fine rabbi, it's the right person, and even if he feels that he's not up for the task and he doesn't have the strength, you should know that the community will give him the strength. And the beginnings are hard, but the ends will be mighty and successful. And starting a new community is a whole blessing on its own. The Rebbe goes on. So for me, I felt obviously a very strong pull to start our own community. So obviously we moved to Novato, and the rest is history, or is still history in the making, I should say. History is not done yet. But anyway, that's all just a side point to tell you. So anyway, Daniel Fairman, this guy from San Diego that I was very close with, and we studied Torah every day for a while. He actually kept a pen and paper next to him. So whatever idea or thought, oh, I have to text this person, he would actually write it down. It just take a little note. He would write it down, and then it would clear his mind from that. And then he was able to refocus on because what the concern, I guess, that he had is it stays in your mind. You're like, oh, I don't want to forget this. So he'll keep it in his mind, and he's not fully focused on the prayer. So what he would do is he would write it down, jot a note, and then be able to be fully focused. Some people could agree with it, some people not. And I'll tell you why not, because it's almost like you're looking forward to sitting down for prayer, because then you have a thought download, right? All the ideas you're going to be able to write down. So we'll see how the Alter Rebbe, if he addresses it in the chapter. It's a good question. I would love to hear if people have a better idea. But it's hard to stop those thoughts, right? The point is, and really over here is talking about the inappropriate thoughts. So the kosher thoughts of texting your daughter or whatever it is, they're all good stuff. I would recommend for now writing it down and carrying on with your prayer. But let's see if we could come up with another one. And yeah, Shira, a good point. It's if it's for Shalom Bayit, certainly. Shalom Bayit means peace in the home, the harmony between spouses. Okay, so back inside, we're in the middle of the book of the Kindle, and I think we're on the bottom of 318. No, we're moving pretty slow today. Sorry for all the thoughts. The Baal Shem Tov taught a method of elevating inappropriate thoughts and reuniting them with their source, based on the principle that every negative energy is ultimately rooted in a positive one, from which it has fallen. By lifting the energy back to its source, the fallen energy is realigned with its positive root. So there's fallen energy coming from a good source, but you lift it up, you bring it back to its source. For example, a thought of desire or lust is a fallen energy of chesed, kindness. So a feeling of lust or desire is actually coming from a root of kindness. Or a thought of violence is a fallen form of gevura, severity. Since these energies originated in God, they ought to be returned to God. So that's from the Keser Shem Tov, which was the book that is not authored by the Baal Shem Tov. It's teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that were authored by a few of his students. And what they write in the name of the Baal Shem Tov is that you should, any feeling, if it's inappropriate, it's coming from a good source, and therefore you have to elevate it. So the Alter Rebbe says, don't get on your high horse. That's not for you. That's for a tzaddik. For this advice was meant only for tzaddikim. The Tanya warns its readership, that's me and you, not to dabble in this practice. Don't get hung up on trying to elevate inappropriate feelings, lust, thoughts, etc. It's not our job. For most of us, dwelling on a lustful thought is likely to lead to more lustful thoughts. For tzaddikim, who have rid themselves of the urge of self-gratification, this technique can be effective, but for the rest of us, it will be counterproductive. This, however, leaves us with a question. This is the question we started the class with. If this technique was intended only for tzaddikim, why are they having inappropriate thoughts at all? Didn't we learn that tzaddik has refined himself to the extent that he is no longer plagued by such thoughts? So how are these thoughts even coming into tzaddik? So now the Alter Rebbe is going to address that. For when these tzaddikim have inappropriate thoughts, they are not the product of their own negative energy, but from the negative energy of others. It's other negative energies, other people's negative energies that they're picking up on. There is a fundamental I love this paragraph. There is a fundamental interconnectedness of all souls, especially those who enjoy close relationships in this world. Therefore, it is possible that while a tzaddik will not have inappropriate thoughts stemming from his own desires, he may be plagued by thoughts from the negative energy he has absorbed from his disciples or others close to him. It is in that case the Baal Shem Tov's method is applicable. So just to summarize, I love this idea. First of all, the idea that we're all interconnected is a very powerful one. The closer we are to each other, the more interconnected. So of course, a Jew or someone from the opposite side of the world has a connection to me. And if I meet them, I have to treat them with dignity, honor, respect. And even if I didn't meet them, I have to care for them. But someone who I know, someone who I'm close with, someone in the community or a family member, we're more interconnected. And by the way, we know this from a simple fact. It was actually a Hayom Yom, which is short tidbits of wisdom from the Rebbe that he compiled in the 40s, teachings from his father-in-law, actually. It's called Hayom Yom, which means day to day, and it's a thought for the day. And in it, just literally a week ago, one of the thoughts were that the Rebbeim, the Rebbes of Chabad, had a practice that from time to time they would think about Chassidim. They would think about each of their Chassidim. They would go through this Chassid and that Chassid in their mind. And the response was that the Chassid, wherever he was in the world, would think of the Rebbe at that same time. And the reason is, and I think there's a word for this in English, I don't know what it is, but we all know this, that when you stare at someone, he could be across the room, looking in the other direction, but he feels someone is staring at him. And he ends up looking back to the person who was gazing at him. Is anyone familiar? There's a word for that. I don't know. But the idea of when you look at someone, the other person feels the sense of someone looking at them and looks back or blinks, like they subconsciously they recognize that someone is looking at them. So from that similar practice, the Rebbe would think of their chassid, and the chassid would think of their Rebbe. It would happen at the same time. So that interconnectedness is there. So if a Rebbe could pick up on the thoughts, even if they're inappropriate, that is going on around them or from their disciples or people connected to them, etc., and therefore the tzaddik could elevate those thoughts. But that is for a tzaddik. That's his job or her job, not mine or yours. And therefore, don't be a fool, is the wording of the Alter Rebbe, to try to sit and elevate. Okay. We're toward the bottom of the page. But when your own inappropriate thoughts caused by the evil in your heart's left chamber pop up in your mind, how could you possibly lift them upwards when you yourself are tied below? You can't free your inappropriate thoughts from the power of klipa so long as you remain tied up and enmeshed with klipa yourself. And therefore, elevating inappropriate thoughts then is not an option, and your only choice is to divert your attention from them immediately before they entice you further. So to explain this last point, there's it's actually a law in Torah that's mentioned in the Talmud and elsewhere. I'll say it in Hebrew. It's ein chavish matir atzmi, which means a person bound up, a person in prison can't untie themselves. If you're shackled in chains, you need someone else, unless you're Houdini, to come and untie you and free you, right? If you're behind, if a person is stuck behind bars, they need someone else to come and redeem them, release them. So if we are stuck in these inappropriate thoughts, how are we able to elevate them? We're stuck in it. We're tied up. We need someone from the outside, someone higher, to be able to release them. It's not our job. There's a beautiful story, and I'll just share the short version of the story. I've shared it before on the high holidays when I usually try to share short tidbits of wisdom and short stories to get us to ponder. It's a story that you perhaps heard from me of Reb Meir of Premishlan. Reb Meir of Premishlan was an elder chassid of the Hasidic dynasties somewhere in Russia, in a town called Premishlan. So he was known as Reb Meir from Premishlan. And there was a mikvah that was used by men. Every day they would immerse in the mikvah before prayers as a method of spiritual purity. And so it was but the mikvah wasn't a real mikvah. It was a spring, a mountain on the mountain. And people would go there. In the summer, it was easy. In the winter, it was much harder to immerse in the mikvah just because of all the snow and the ice on the mountain. So it would be dangerous to climb up and down. But Reb Meir would still go even in the winter, even though he was older. But the younger people would feel it was too treacherous and too dangerous. But there was a few younger people that said, if Meir could do it, we could do it. So they tried, they climbed up the mountain, they injured themselves, they fell down, they couldn't get to the top of the mountain, as Reb Meir was doing to immerse in the mikvah. So they came down and they found Meir and they said, how do you do it? What's your method and technique for climbing the mountain in the ice and cold and the snow? And he responded in Yiddish, and I'll translate it. He says, "As mir seinen verbunden von oben, fällt mir nicht herab von unten." If we are connected from on high, we don't fall down below. Reb Meir was saying, I have a pretty strong, secure tie connection with on high. And when I'm tied on high, I'm buckled, I don't fall down. And the reason why I just bring up that story is for all of us that don't have that secure, strong connection. Of course, we all have a connection. But if we can't be certain that our inappropriate thoughts can be elevated, because really it's counterproductive, it's just going to lead to another inappropriate thought, etc. It's not our job to try to redeem them, to try to elevate them. A tzaddik could do that, not us. Okay, section 2. Any questions? Are we good? Okay, good. We're covering some ground. A positive attitude. But nevertheless, Don't allow your mood to deteriorate from inappropriate thoughts and allow this to bring sadness and self-loathing upon you during worship, which needs to be carried out with an abundance of joy. So don't feel down and self-loathing over the fact that you're having inappropriate thoughts during prayer. Let it bring you to a state of joy. And this is familiar, we learned from chapter 26, where we learned the all-encompassing principle that a positive mood needs to be maintained at all times, as the impulse to evil tends to be successful when you feel down. An inappropriate thought cannot be allowed to dampen your spirits, especially during worship. Rather, on the contrary, an inappropriate thought should strengthen you and intensify all your powers of concentration and prayer with more happiness and joy. So we're going to have to figure out why having an inappropriate thought should get you to a state of joy. It's making me feel disgusting that I'm having this feeling, this thought. So how does that bring me to a state of joy? So this is the beautiful thing that we started the class with, and we'll see it now inside. The Tanya offers a powerful insight how to remain joyous when an inappropriate thought occurs. When you take to heart that inappropriate thought popped into your mind from the klipa in your heart's left chamber. Where is the source of this inappropriate thought? It's not coming from the godly soul, which is the main chamber of the godly soul, is the main source is in the mind. The animal soul, the klipa, is rooted in the left ventricular, the left chamber of the heart. So that's where your inappropriate thought is coming from, which in your case of the aspiring or actual Beinoni is in competition with your divine soul. And everyone knows that in a fight or wrestling match, this is the example I gave before of hockey, when one person is winning, the competitor tries to make a comeback with all his might. He gets an adrenaline rush to push back. So when you're during prayer, the godly side is feeling strong, powerful. It's dominating. The weaker side is feeling a little bit weaker and it's getting down. So therefore, the klipa side is going to push with an extra rush to try to compete. So that's what's happening during prayer. Your prayer is being so impactful that the klipa side is trying to make an extra push to try to not be weakened. And therefore, when your divine soul intensifies its energies to pray, the klipa intensifies itself against your divine soul to disorient your divine soul and to derail it with an inappropriate thought. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to stick a thorn, a wrench in the wheel, because it's turning. Your godly side is moving, is elevating. So it's trying to stop it at all costs and try to remain a competitor. So the above analysis runs contrary to the popular misconception of those who mistakenly argue that their prayers are rendered worthless by inappropriate thoughts. This is a very fundamental part of the Tanya. So we'll read it, but then we'll try to explain it together. Arguing that if they had prayed acceptedly and properly, they would have been free from inappropriate thoughts. But doesn't the presence of these thoughts represent a failure at some level? So I'll read it inside, but then I would love to explain this. If we each had just one soul, then they would have been correct. Since if the same soul that prayed was also the one thinking inappropriate thoughts, then either it's praying properly or it isn't. And the presence of inappropriate thoughts indicates that it isn't. So let's just explain this. This is a fundamental teaching to Tanya. The fact that I'm praying and during my prayers, inappropriate thoughts come up could dishearten me. And on this section, what we're saying is because it comes out that I'm a hypocrite. I'm not this holy guy or holy person with good thoughts of prayer. I'm actually having inappropriate thoughts. So I'm disgusted. So people say if a person has inappropriate thoughts in their prayer, it shows that their prayer is worthless. So that would be true, the Alter Rebbe said, if we only had one soul. So then that soul is either involved in godly pursuits, prayer, etc., or it's involved in mundane, coarse, inappropriate pursuits. So if during prayer I'm coming up with inappropriate thoughts, it shows that I'm two-faced and that soul is really involved in schmutz. But the fact is we have two souls. Each one is thinking their own thing. So your godly soul is praying and that's still worthy. It's just the animal soul is trying to fight back with its own thoughts. So don't be down on yourself. Don't beat yourself up that you're having inappropriate thoughts and it would render your prayer unworthy. God forbid, not true at all. Chas v'shalom. That would be true if you only had one soul, but that's not the way it is. We have two souls. So let's continue that inside. But in actual fact, we're on the top of the page, you have two souls competing with each other in your brain. The desire and will of each one being to control you, to fill your mind exclusively with its influence, right? If you remember the example we gave in chapter 9, I think it was actually the first class back in March that we started recording and doing over Zoom. But over there, we were learning that the animal soul and the godly soul are both trying to get the keys to the driver's seat. They're both trying to drive the car. The car is the person, the action, the speech, and our thoughts. What are we going to think about? The souls are fighting. The godly soul wants you to think about Hashem. The animal soul wants you to think about you. So that's the way it is. So they're both fighting for control. So the presence of inappropriate thoughts does not reflect negatively on the devotion of your divine soul. So your inappropriate thoughts is nothing to do with a bad prayer, since all your thoughts of Torah and fear of heaven come from the divine soul, whereas all thoughts of worldly matters come from the animal soul. The two types of thought, appropriate or inappropriate, are like different voices in your head emanating from different places. If there was just one you, there was only you, then a failure to concentrate all the time in prayer might be disappointing. But since you actually have two selves, the godly one and the animal, an intense competition means that some real devotion is emanating from your higher soul. And therefore, the lower soul, the lower you, is fighting back. So this is such a cool part. And also, I'll stop for question. Whoops. Stop for questions. Oh, did I go back? So just take let me just take a question whenever. I love it. Wow. Someone saying that they always go back to think about the Shema whenever they're stuck under concentration. I think that's a beautiful thing. Shema is a great way of putting yourself back in the mode of what you're supposed to be concentrating on. That's actually a great. If you want to share that with everyone, that's I think appropriate. Up to you, but I think that. Oh, go ahead. So I'll let you do the honors. I think that's very nice.
I often get distracted during prayer, whether it's looking around at people or thoughts that come into my head. And in order for me to redirect my prayer to the appropriate place and have the correct emotions, I say the prayer, the Shema, just the one sentence, not the before and the after, just the Shema sentence. And for some reason, I can really concentrate with that Shema. Whereas during other sections of prayer, I can't concentrate or find myself having difficulty concentrating. So I go back to the Shema, even if it's in an inappropriate place in the prayer, I go back to the Shema and I can recenter myself.
And Barbara, I just want to ask you a little more on that. Just we may be getting into a prayer theme class, but I think it's just such a beautiful thing that you just shared. Is it the words of the Shema that since you understand them, it's easier to focus on them? Or is it just the message of Shema that God is one in our life? Like, my question is, if you would have a more understanding of other parts of the prayer, would your focus not lead to other things? Meaning, if you understood the translation of other parts of the prayer, would that be helpful? Or is it just because of what the Shema represents, the constitution, the importance of the oneness of God? It seems like that's more in line.
I think for me, and I can only speak for myself, it's the sentence of the Shema. I think even if I understood every prayer in Hebrew and can translate it into English, I think my mind would still fall.
Beautiful. Nice. There's years ago, not so many, but like 8 years ago, after we moved it to Novato, my main teacher, the one that taught me the most Torah, he's like the dean of the West Coast Talmudical Seminary. His name is Rabbi Shachat. The Rebbe sent him to be in charge and to teach in the 70s. And I think I've told you the three, many of you are familiar with Rabbi Rice in San Rafael and Rabbi Skup in Mill Valley. Rabbi Shachat, this rabbi in LA, educated all of us in different decades, right? Rabbi Rice in the 80s, Rabbi Skup in the 90s, and myself in the early zeros. And so he's a pretty impressive rabbi. And I personally, I'm very close to him. Like after studying under him, he invited me back after I was ordained to teach in the same school. So I got to be very close to him to see how he teaches, and he would give me guidance, and I would actually mark tests in his office with him. We got very close. So he actually walked me literally under the eye to the chuppah. Like he was holding my arm to the chuppah. I was very I still am very close to him. And so he came here to visit 8 years ago. He stayed in my house for a day. He actually farbrained. I invited all the Chabad rabbis across the Bay Area to participate in a gathering in honoring the Rebbe for the Rebbe's birthday. So he was the guest speaker, and he stayed in our house. It was very special. I just remember I took him and his wife. His wife wanted a tour of the Bay Area. And this was 3 days before Pesach. It was a pretty hectic day, but I gave her a tour. I took them to Muirwoods. And I just remember the whole way to Muirwoods, Rabbi Shachat, the rabbi, was complaining that I'm driving too fast and he's getting dizzy from the winding roads. And his wife was just reciting words of prayer that we say every day in our Shacharit prayer. The words are Marabu Masecha Hashem. How stunning is God's handiwork? How stunning is God's creation? And I say that just because this morning, just in terms of because of COVID, and how when I drop off my kids, after dropping off some kids for carpool at 8:15, I have half an hour that I could pray before I have to drop off my Chaya, my 4-year-old. So I actually pray by one of the Terra Linda mountains. I've been doing it the past few days with my Chaya, and it's stunning. It's just a beautiful moment of prayer. And when I get up to that part of prayer, it's not the Shema. It's the Marabu, how beautiful is God's handiwork. And you see the mountains and then the birds just like singing together, all of it together. Like you could have such a beautiful meditation just on how great God's world is. But I love hearing that whenever you lose focus, you go back to what you find you could find your meditation on, and it brings you back, it grounds you in your prayer. That's an awesome, that's Barbara, I love when you share these things. That's awesome. So I'm just going to read Shira. So if we have inappropriate thoughts, we should try to ignore them, knowing that the divine soul is battling the animal soul as prayer goes on. Yeah, so just to summarize, that's a great point to summarize. The fact that we're having inappropriate thoughts should actually bring you to a state of joy, because it's actually meaning my prayer is working. My prayer is so good that the godly soul is feeling so high that the animal soul is feeling it needs to compete. Some people say, my prayer is not working. It's ineffective. Look what thoughts is coming to mind. The Alter Rebbe says that would have been right if you only had one soul. But since you have two souls, when the animal soul sees that the godly soul is lifting itself up and it's feeling so high in its prayer, the animal soul needs to fight back. So it's going to try to throw a wrench. It's going to try to give you an inappropriate thought. But realize that it's actually coming from the effect of your power of your prayer. So if you realize that, it'll bring you to a state of joy. The animal soul, what it's trying to do is make you feel shame, hypocritical, and make you feel self-loathing that you're having this. That's exactly what it wants, because then it gets you down. And you can't serve, you can't pray, you can't study when you're feeling down. We all know this. You can't be successful when you're feeling down. You can't communicate properly when you're feeling stuck. So that's what the animal soul is trying to do. But realize that it's coming from a great place, actually. So what should you do with that? Just drop it. Or like Barbara's saying, go to a place that is going to allow you to bring you back into the prayer. Okay, I guess we could actually stop right there.
Can I ask a question,
Oh
please?
yeah, of course, Adrian.
Yeah. I was wondering what your teacher that told you he wrote down what was distracting him, what he did on Shabbat or other days when you can't write.
Ooh, good question. I'm assuming he was yeah, he actually did teach me a lot. He was a doctor, Dr. Daniel Fairman. The Torah that we have comes from him. What did he do on Shabbos? I don't know. I can't ask him now.
Yeah. Too bad.
I can ask his wife. I don't know, but I would love if you have an idea of what to do. That's a great question because the law is that we don't write on Shabbos.
Right. Correct.
How do you take marks down when you can't write? I don't know. Good question, Adrian. Awesome. I'm so glad everyone's enjoying it. This lesson really helps. Thank you. All right, everyone, have a great week. Enjoy your prayers. Let it reach and pierce the gates of heaven and bestow upon us every blessing of health and goodness and joy that we could all use and need. L'chaim, everyone. Have a great end to your week. An early Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.